Alrighty, folks, welcome back. This is another Hypnosis Masters interview series. I'm here with a very special and very interesting guest today. And the thing that makes this particular hypnotist really interesting is he's been around for quite some time in hypnosis. He's basically read virtually anything there is about it. And the one thing I really enjoy about him is that he's really seen the whole range of what hypnosis is. Everything from stage hypnosis to Ericksonian hypnosis and even working with police and forensic hypnosis. He's kind of done it all. And so that's a tremendous wealth of experience that we're going to be exploring today. So I'm talking, of course, to Mike Mandel. So first and foremost, Mike, let me just say hello and welcome.
Thank you, Igor. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. Now, before we go any further, folks at home, if you want to find out a bit more about Mike Mandel, just go to mikemandelhypnosis.com. My name, of course, is Igor Lerochovsky from hypnosistrainingacademy.com. And I'll remind you of those websites at the end of our chat today. But for now, let's go to our guest and Mike. You started hypnosis in a somewhat unusual way, in the sense that a lot of people fell into it, trying to get over their own troubles and so on. And usually in their later teens or early 20s when they start taking a little bit more of control in their own life. For you, things happened much earlier on, did they not?
Yes, they did. Nice tag question to start things off, by the way. Yeah, we came to Canada from England in 1957. And by 1965, I was addicted to North American television because there was nothing like it in Britain. There's so many channels, just amazing. And my father said, I want you to read more books. And I said, well, get me some. And he took me to a bookstore, said any book I wanted I could have.
Right.
And the very first one I saw was a paperback book by Walter B. Gibson, The Key to Hypnotism.
Wow.
And as a 12-year-old boy, I immediately began thinking in terms of, the standard things, world dominance and all that stuff. Said,
of course.
Hypnotize anyone, force them to obey your every command, all this wonderful mythology.
Right.
So I picked this book up. It was probably $1. And I took it home and learned it all. And I got to get somebody to work with. And there were two kids next door, Max and Wayne Gibbs. And I've actually put Wayne Gibbs's photograph up on our Facebook page. And the photograph of how he was subject 0.
Right.
And where it was. Anyway, in Toronto, there was an animal hospital next door, and their father was a vet tech, and they lived in an apartment above this animal hospital.
Right.
So I went over with the book, and they're sitting at a picnic table outside, and I said, can I hypnotize you? And they don't even know what I'm talking about.
Of course.
Kids. So I choose intentionally the method for bad subjects, difficult subjects, thinking, let's be sure.
Okay.
And, I'm doing this eye fixation thing and counting, and they're opening and closing their eyes. And Max thinks it's a huge joke. He's probably 9 years old. Wayne is about 10. But Wayne goes into a trance. And
nice.
I was freaked out. I barely knew what to do with it. So this became the beginning. I hypnotized him a few times. And by the second or third time, I caused sort of a glove anesthesia in one of his hands without really knowing, and stuck pins right almost through his fingertip.
Now just to check, you're about 12 years old at this stage, right?
I was exactly 12 years old, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is some crazy experiences you're having at a really early age.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, and he didn't feel it, and his mom was really freaked out, and he had blood all over his hand. And I ran into Wayne about 10 years ago. Yeah. So I was 54, and he was about 51.
Right.
And he came out to a theater show I was doing in Prince Edward County, a lovely part of wine country here. And he said, I connected with him online, and he came out to the show, but beforehand he said, what are you doing these days? I remember you used to hypnotize me and stick pins in your fingers. And so we got him to stand up in the audience, and everyone applauded. And this is Wayne, the actual Wayne.
This is such serious. That's amazing.
So that was the start. It caused the whole ignition for me, where I found it fascinating and stumbled along from there.
Right. So you had a really early success that must have really blown you away, because, you've gone from reading a book to actually getting full-blown glove anesthesia, sticking needles in someone's hand, which is, probably nowadays, folks listening at home, don't do that stuff. There's some kind of medical implications there,
don't
of
do
course.
What we're saying, right. Don't do this at home.
This is just kids acting out and doing silly things, but actually it's under a foundation for your fascination with this field, right?
Absolutely. And around that time, I got into sort of a very basic mentalism as well. I started doing a form of Hellstromism. So I was doing muscle reading and picking up subtle idiomotor signals. There was this guy, Zolar, I don't know his real name, but he wrote all these books, and
Right.
one of them was this mind reading stuff. So I got into that at the same time.
Right. So this is really starting to move you down the train of thought of an entertainer at this point. You're not really thinking in terms of one day I'll be a hypnotist and I'll help people and do all sorts of stuff. You're still just amusing yourself and and thinking about amusing your friends and kind of showing off the powers of the mind in many ways, right?
Absolutely. All of that. You nailed it.
Perfect. So then the big question is, you're 12 years old, maybe this is now going to your 13th, 14th year as well as you're learning these other skills as well. So people might naturally guess that you were instantly an entertainer, you went up on stage, you did your thing. I think Dave Ellman famously started when he was a teenager himself. Is that what happened for you, or is there like a period of interlude where you went kind of normal for a while before entering this profession?
There was a fairly normal period. Yeah, I remember my next major memory of it was about age 14 in high school.
Right.
And I had a friend, Dan, and he and I were always attempting to hypnotize each other to do astral projection and leave our bodies and fly. We never had much success with that, unfortunately.
Right.
And then just through high school, I kept doing stuff. And then I, just trying on friends. And I had a big breakthrough, though. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was about 18 years old,
right.
And I was at a friend's apartment, also in Toronto again. Mm-hmm. And this guy had these amazing parties every Friday night.
Cool.
And one Friday, he's jammed all these idiots. One guy's got a guitar and he's playing Stairway to Heaven a million times. And, nobody would stop him. We're scared he'd start on House of the Rising Sun. So we just let him play. And finally, someone said, shut him up. And I said, maybe I should hypnotize him. And the whole room perked up. They said, can you do that? And I said, oh, yeah, I'm really good at it. Just trying to build the prestige. It didn't really have that great a success other than Wayne.
Right.
And so this guy said, yeah, I want to be hypnotized. So we took the guitar off him, thus effectively disarming him.
Right.
And then 2 girls wanted to be hypnotized, too. So we put them all on the couch. And I did the Walter B. Gibson induction with the coin and their eyes closed and open, which I still teach. And all of a sudden, like almost in unison, all 3 of them, head tilt, exhalation, they all just dropped into really nice trances.
Fantastic.
And my buddy says, what happens now? I said, I don't know. It's never worked this well before. He says, well, dude, turn them into something, do something. Right. And I think the Rolling Stones had been through town fairly, recently at that time. So I said, when you come out of trance, my first experiment with post-hypnotic suggestion, when you come out of trance, the next person who walks through the door of the apartment will be Mick Jagger. Right. And then we wait. I bring them out of it, and amazingly, they all had spontaneous amnesia. They're all like, when do we start? And I'm thinking, are these guys setting me up for a joke here? How can this be?
Right, because this is the thing about someone who's responding to amnesia and a post-hypnotic suggestion. They're so serious about the fact that this reality is real. In this case, the idea that, they haven't been hypnotized yet, that it does actually feel like someone's putting you on, like someone's just play acting, because it's just too perfect, right?
Isn't that the truth, Igor? And I think that's why we really do need somnambulism to get a strong post-hypnotic, because we need that amnesia so they're not going to consciously interfere.
Right, right.
And so they come out of trance, and we're waiting to see who shows up. And a lot of time starts to go by, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I started thinking, oh, man, it's taking too long. This isn't going to work. Okay. I had no idea then that, the research had been done triggering hypnotic suggestion way, way later.
Of course.
This is nothing.
Right.
So the door opens, and this one guy shows up at the party, and he had transferred to our school from Kingston, Jamaica.
Right.
He was Jamaican. He did not closely resemble Mick Jagger by his own admission.
Right.
And all 3 of them freaked out and said, it's Mick. And they're like trying to touch him and get his autograph and stuff.
That's too funny.
He doesn't know what the heck's going on.
Right. He would be quite weirded out, I guess, because he just came in the room and suddenly these 3 people rush him like, what the hell?
Yeah. So he just no idea. So I snapped them out of it. And I asked the 3 of them, what did you experience? And the response, I really think this was a turning point for me. Because at that moment, I recognized the absolute subjectivity of the hypnotic trance. And I mean, you've done a hell of a lot of hypnosis, Igor. You notice how nobody does it exactly the same, do they? Nobody does.
Yep.
And so, people trying to do it right, but do it right for them is better.
Right.
So when the 3 of them, the one girl said, well, I knew it was Pat, but I heard myself saying it was Mick Jagger. So here we have a classic dissociation. She's hearing herself say this.
Right.
And the other girl says, no. It looked like a Jamaican guy, but I knew it really was Mick Jagger wearing an elaborate disguise. He said, wow, really, really elaborate. And the guy was the best. He said, I don't know what these two are talking about. I saw Mick. He came through the door. I talked to him. I got his autograph. It was amazing. He was convinced. Awesome. For him, it was a complete experience.
Right.
And I think for me at that point, Igor, there was no turning back.
Well, this is a really powerful experience. I mean, you've got about as textbook a set of responses as you can get. You know, the dissociation, the self-deception, if you like, and then the pure hallucination, the positive, negative hallucination over riding reality, if you like. So you've got a taste of the full range of hypnotic responses, right?
Yeah, I guess we did.
That's amazing. That's really impressive. So this is almost like God saying, you're going to be a hypnotist, and here's how. Is this what then sparked your enthusiasm to start going pro and doing full-time hypnosis? Or,
no.
Or did you put it back in your back pocket again and get on with life for a while again before another event took you closer to that?
It was mostly back pocket. You know, I still fiddled around with it from time to time. There was never a time from age 13 I wasn't doing it a bit, you know, every couple of months or something. But there were no huge hiatuses, but it never really got much better until that moment. And then I think I only had the one book, so I was experimenting constantly without knowing any better.
Right.
But the turning point was I had left high school. I mean, I was an absolutely terrible student. I went from going from grade 3 to grade 5. I skipped grade 4 completely. I was always in the hall doing tests, and they said I had some aptitude. No one could figure out what the heck it was. It sure wasn't, you know, mathematics, and it certainly wasn't mechanical ability. I can take my head off with a screwdriver.
Right.
But
if only they could test you for things like hypnosis back in the 1960s, right?
They could have launched me in the right direction. So, you know, I did really well in public school. Then I had a sadistic teacher in grade 5 who pretty well almost gave me a nervous breakdown as a little kid, because I'd gone from grade 3 to 5 to a mixed 5-6 class. And he expected the grade 5s to work at 6th level, which was just impossible for me.
Right, because that basically means you skipping 2 years at that point, right?
Pretty much. It felt like that, yeah. And so what happened was, by the time I got to high school, I'd already lost interest in school. He'd really put me off. I'd never lost interest in learning, but definitely lost interest in school. So I failed grade 9 and I failed grade 11. I went to summer school 3 times, and I never completed high school. I went to a hippie-free school called West Nohant, where you just write your own curriculum, and I just never even bothered showing up most of the time. So, you know, this is coming out of the 60s.
You went for the mystical curriculum, you know, I'm all Zen, I don't even have to be there anymore, right?
yeah. And so then I couldn't get a job. You know, I had no training of any kind. And the only thing I could do was, they were hiring telephone operators at Bell Telephone Company of Canada in Toronto. And my dad was an engineer at Bell Canada. So he put my name in. I got this job, and I was working for, I think, $2 an hour. And living below the poverty line. If I hadn't been living with my parents, it would have been a nightmare.
Of course.
So, just terrible. But the great thing was, I was the only male operator. Like, there were a lot in England then, but not in Canada. I'm working in an office with 150 women. I mean, it was just fantastic.
And how old were you now? Like, this is 18, 19 sort of age?
18 to 21.
Right. So your dating life is
19
probably...
to 21, yeah.
So your dating life probably took a rather sharp upturn to the positive, I take it?
Very much, I would think, yes.
Okay, so you're at Bell Canada for about 3 years, working as a telephone operator. When does hypnosis peek back into your life again?
It peaked back in November 1974. And I remember because the amazing Kreskin was performing at Minkler Auditorium in Toronto, Seneca College, beautiful amphitheater indoors.
He's influenced a lot of hypnotists, of course, especially in North America.
Right. But in Canada, there weren't many people going across. You know, there was Peter Ravine, and he was sort of the only one. But Kreskin was doing his anti-hypnosis, his mentalism thing. He had his show, which was filmed in Ottawa and then Toronto, and it was famous and popular around the world, the English-speaking world. So when he performed there, my friend Steve was a booking agent. And he said, let me get tickets, we'll go. So 4 of us went, and I was blown away by it. He was doing all these power of suggestion things and mentalism, and I just loved it. But because I had a knowledge of magic, I was able to deconstruct some of his stuff and replicate it. And so I said to Steve one day, I said, I can do some of that stuff. And he said, what are you talking about? So I showed him. And he was a booking agent for a company that's no longer existent called Music Shop International, and mostly booking bands. And he said, I'm going to get you a gig somewhere.
Awesome.
So he did.
So this is really your friend pushing you into the limelight at this point,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and we're still in touch, which is great.
Great.
And I flew out to Edmonton from Toronto, and I'd never been away from home by myself before.
Wow.
I was very, very homesick, and still very much a homeboy. And
big adventure
liked being
for sure,
home.
right?
Yeah, and wound up in Edmonton, and I was on this TV show, and they had sold it to them that I'd done all these shows and everything, and I'd done nothing.
So your first gig, having been a self-taught hypnotist throughout these years and just kind of deconstructing Kreskin's act a little bit, your first gig is to be on a TV show, is that right?
Yeah. Oh
my gosh, that's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
January 29th, 1975. So this was a month after I saw Kreskin. Horrendous pressure. Horrendous pressure.
That's crazy.
And I went to my family doctor. I was so stressed, and he gave me tranquilizers.
Right. Well, I believe it, because not only have you not got your entire show scripted out, you haven't even tested it yet. And instead of having your usual, start in life, which is like a little pub audience with 15 drunk people who will forget you tomorrow morning, you're on a TV show. That's pretty crazy, right?
It was horrible. And 2 years later, I saw it in reruns.
Oh, yeah.
And 2 years later, so in 77, I was already cringing at how horrible it was. The cringe factor was terrible. I was on with Philip Agee, who was a CIA agent who left the company.
Right.
And he was in Canada doing a tour, and he was protected by RCMP guards, protected from the CIA, apparently.
Wow.
And it was Cab Calloway, a jazz singer. My mom said, it can't be Cab Calloway. I used to see him in England when I was a kid, but it was. And it was, I couldn't do hypnosis on the air.
Right.
And I did a really weak mentalism effect. It was just horrible.
Right. But the key here is, and this is, I think, a good learning lesson for most people. Everyone thinks that, the greats in the industry, and there's some really good hypnotists out there today, and everyone thinks that they were just born to be great, especially if all you had shared is the story of being at the party and all three people zoning out, and you just did this from a book. It would give a false impression versus, getting to the point where you are requires significant failure and picking yourself up, learning from them, and getting better, right?
Absolutely right. And, I'm sure you think back in your own career, and maybe you had an advantage I didn't, insofar as you probably already knew the NLP maxim that failure is only feedback. I didn't have access to that yet.
But it still hurt. I still cringe at some of my early clients, and I'm sure you do the same. I wish I could get in my time machine, go back and say, just leave it alone. Let me show you, right? Because it would be so much better than what I did originally. But this is how we learn, right? We've got to take some risks. We've got to make some mistakes, and then deconstruct our mistakes to figure out, what do I do better next time, right?
Right, absolutely. And so you jump in the deep end, and I still think that's probably one of the best ways to learn. I got this huge attitude of jump in at the top and figure it out when you get there. You can't do that with brain surgery, but you can do it with a lot of other things.
Absolutely. So now you mentioned something a moment ago again that, it's a couple of things. First, you did your first show on air, and of course now, just 2 years later, you were already seeing a lot of the things you could improve there. But of course, the stress of that meant you were given basically medication by a family doctor to help you calm your nerves, to be able to get on stage and do your thing. So how did that evolve? Because you're a very relaxed, confident, easygoing person now, especially in your hypnosis. And of course that's part of your vast amount of experience. But how did you go from where you were then to now? Because I'm guessing you're not taking Valium right now. Would that be fair to say?
No, definitely not taking anything now. No. But I had a really good doctor, and I'm sure he's since passed away. But I went to him, I told him I was going on stage, and I was really nervous. And my parents I was living at home, they just know to get out of my way, like if I had to, because I was so frantic and so wound up and stressed. And I get like horrible diarrhea and anxiety, but the way, of course, because of that, because of the adrenaline, when I was off stage, it would switch off when the show was over, and I get this huge endorphin rush from surviving it. And then I loved it again. Yeah. So I remember it was Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. They had a winter festival there in February. They still have it. It's right on Lake Superior. So it's ice cold and a lot of snow. And I was playing at this place called the Water Tower. Right. And it was a nice hotel, and I'm sure it's still there. And with a couple of bands, and every night I had to do a show, and I had to do something in the afternoons as well. And the first night I went to go on stage and I did my usual routine. I'm sure it was there. That's my memory. And I went, open my luggage and take out the, the diazepam, whatever he gave me. And I couldn't find them. And then I start looking everywhere else. And now it's getting, I need an hour for them to start working.
Right.
And I did that thing. You know the thing, Igor, how weird our brains are, where you can check for something and it's not there. Well, maybe if I keep checking the same place another 600 times.
I just didn't look right. Exactly. Right?
Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, it's happened to me a lot of times. And that's usually a sign that I'm getting a little desperate now, because it's like, oh my God, it's got to be there. Please, Lord, let it be there. And of course it isn't. So you have to get more creative.
One time.
Yeah, exactly. Just give me one more pass and then you have to deal with life.
One more chance, too.
Yeah.
It'll magically appear. But the pills didn't appear. And so they called me. I had to go on stage, and I was so stressed. And then 10, 15 minutes into the act, I noticed something unusual. I didn't feel any different than when I was taking the damn things. I was fine.
That's awesome.
And I found out later that Dr. Houston had given me a placebo. He had the sense to not getting me, letting me get wired to some drug.
Yep, absolutely. So the hypnotist got hypnotized without even knowing it.
I guess that's it, isn't it? I fell for the placebo effect.
But that's fantastic. I mean, I know you know this, but one of my favorite definitions of hypnosis is the Kirsch definition of the non-deceptive mega placebo. I think that's a really nice way of defining hypnosis, and why not have the personal experience with yourself, right?
Yeah, fantastic. It's a great way of looking at it. I love it.
Yeah. So
non-deceptive, that's the key.
That's the key, exactly, because everything we do, the suggestion is out there, it's open, it's up front, and it still works. We don't need to deceive people in order to tap into the immense healing potential the body and mind have, right?
And they certainly do. I mean, they certainly have that potential, no question about it.
Right. So it sounds like now your feet are firmly planted on the path of a stage hypnotist, you're an entertainer, you're doing the classic blend of stage hypnosis with mentalism, because that really augments a lot of the impact that you're having. So what are some interesting stories or lessons that you learned during your time as a hypnotist doing these things?
Well, I'll tell you that, and this probably helps people just starting out. You have to give yourself permission to fail outrageously, because, man, outrageous some nights. There were nights I dreaded going on stage and wondered what on earth I was doing. I remember doing a gig in a small town, Ontario, Palmerston, Ontario, and we had about 450 people there for a Friday night show, which was unusual. It was very exciting. I went on stage, and I was using an unusual induction pattern back then that I had modeled off Kreskin. And basically he calls it, he does, there's no such thing as hypnosis. And then he sets up a straw man and redefines it in a way that we'd never defend anyway, and says, therefore, it doesn't exist. Like, he basically frames hypnosis as this special state, and you can prove there's no special state, therefore there's no hypnosis. But I started modeling his induction, which was no induction. And basically, you run a series of hypnosis tests,
right,
one after another, and weeding the group out. But you never actually do it. You just do about 4 tests,
right?
Phenomena. So it's pretty obvious now. But back then, it was very different and weird.
Right.
And so my first test was hand clasp. The hands locked out, arms extended. All 25 people who were supposed to be locked together, their hands locked together. All 25, their hands come apart with no effort. I mean, it wasn't difficult. Right. It was 100% failure.
Wow.
It's horrible. I joke about it. I say it was it's a horrible blank the rest of the evening.
Yeah. So how do you recover from something like that? Because didn't that sort of make you question whether or not you want to continue as a stage hypnotist?
Well, gosh, yeah. Plus, I still had time I had to fill.
Of course.
So fortunately, I fell back on the Hellstromism, the ideomotor stuff. And I had somebody hide something, and I managed to find it, and it got a great response. But it was still, the show was definitely cut short.
Right.
And it freaked me out.
So the key here is anyone who's interested in stage hypnosis, always have something as a backup in your back pocket in case something like this happens. I mean, I guess that now, if it were to happen again, you have lots of other outs, other tests you can do, other success places you can take them to, so that it doesn't seem to be as big a deal. But if you are still relatively new at this and suddenly this disaster strikes, that's a big deal, right?
Yeah. In fact, now I don't do a lot of hypnosis shows anymore, but now that wouldn't be a problem, because I basically modeled what my friend Michael C. Anthony does. He always has with him about 3 killer mental effect to do it well. So it's even written into his contract. I think he's brilliantly put it. Yeah. So if there's a problem, he can just fall back on this other stuff.
Nice. Well, that's a nice safety net, especially for a show like that, because no matter what happens, you still got to entertain the audience. And even though it may not be classical hypnotic technique, at least they're still getting a show, and it's still sort of related to the whole power of the mind, right?
Absolutely. And well, Igor, did you do a lot of shows in your early days?
I did not. I did a little bit of street hypnosis. That was my thing, having more fun like that. I did 1 or 2 shows. I wasn't great at it, and so I haven't got the same resonance for it. But street hypnosis was more I was interested in, especially when it went more towards the conversational hypnosis side of things.
Absolutely. In fact, the first time I heard of you many years ago was your street hypnosis deck.
Oh, yes. That's an old blast from the past, that, right?
Yeah. Well, I've got one.
Yeah. Is this the really old first generation one with all the weird colors and writing in the background? Or the slightly cleaned up?
Yeah.
Wow, you really have first generation then. That's a long, long time ago. Wonderful.
I'll get you to sign it one day.
I will be delighted to. Okay, so we're now in sort of in the middle of your career. You've got some good hypnotic chops down. You're starting to do good stage shows. You've had a few hiccups, like the audience that won't respond at all, but you found fixes for that, and you kept in the game long enough to overcome that and keep going. So, because I know you were at one point considered one of Canada's foremost stage hypnotists. How did that all come about?
It came about just because there was nobody else doing it.
Okay.
And, I wound up winning a bunch of awards for excellence in entertainment. And in my younger days, the last one was in 2000, and it was the Hall of Fame award that Jim Carrey won and a few other Canadian entertainers. Right. But the thing was, there was nobody else doing it. So the field was wide open for me in the mid-'70s. Right. When I started, 75, and then by 1978, we really blew it wide open. I went through a series of managers, and the one had this experience where he was in Florida on vacation. He walked into a bar, and he saw a guy doing just hypnosis essentially doing street hypnosis in a bar. Right. Just on individuals. And he was actually cheating a bit. He was doing like a carotid artery pressure on people based on what the manager told me.
Folks at home, don't do that.
Yeah, do not be doing that.
That is not a healthy way of faking hypnosis.
No, it is not. And it's not hypnosis initially either.
It's just them fainting.
Yeah. So anyway, he talked to this bar hypnotist, and the guy said he'd always wanted to do a show where he took people on a trip into outer space. Now, this is when Star Trek was huge, Star Wars had just come out, and everybody's talking about this stuff. And he got this brilliant idea. And he decided to repackage my show. So instead of a man with a briefcase, a microphone and 15 chairs, we got this stage built. And Igor, for its time, it was huge. It was on the cover of Performance magazine. Wow. It was nuts. We had an 8-foot by 8-foot panel of fiber optics, all laboriously threaded through by hand. Wow. And 2 huge rear projection screens with 6 projectors with computerized dissolves, which were cutting edge at the time. Now they'd be doorstops now.
Oh, of course.
But so we had the soundtrack written in Toronto. We had the set designed and built in Las Vegas, and we had pyrotechnics designed by a company called Lunatech in Huntsville, Alabama, who did it for Rush and Kiss. So I'd take them on this trip into outer space, and this thing would take off. There'd be flame projectors, flames would fly out like actual flames out the side of this. Right.
So again, something for the 70s where health and safety was a little less stringent, right?
No kidding. And I was wearing these, either a white or a black skin-tight jumpsuit. I mean, 70s, right? With my rock and roll Jimmy Page hair down past my shoulders.
But I'm guessing the audience was blown away to be able to actually step into a sci-fi saga like that. And even the people volunteering to come on stage, I'm guessing, I don't know this, but you let me know, that getting volunteers to come up to that particular show was 10 times easier than any other show, just because of the amazing experience that someone who was in the show could actually have, right?
Yes, absolutely true. People wanted to take a trip into outer space,
I could believe that, yeah.
Yeah, so we had flame projectors, we had things that go off in the air over the audience. So we'd be attacked by aliens, and the designer had got car headlights, put them in tubes, and cranked the power up so high that their lifespan was 20 minutes now. Wow. And then these things would go on through a smoke-filled room. You'd see beams go through the air, and then these explosions would go off over the audience.
Wow.
And disappear before they hit the audience. So just like the kids loved it. They did it in theaters and things. But it was a 3-hour setup time. The show had now lengthened to 2.5 to 3 hours.
Wow.
It was exhausting.
I believe it. So how did that develop? Was that now the trend going forwards, or at some point did you, obviously you're not doing that show anymore, so what happened to that show in the end?
Well, eventually the jumpsuits wouldn't fit anymore. A 64-year-old man wearing them doesn't look good. No, what happened was we had a couple of 3 unfortunate incidents.
Okay.
And fortunately, nobody was injured. We were down in Wisconsin doing a university tour, and we're in a theater, and it must have been 100 degrees in there and really humid. And so they're setting up the explosions to go off in the air over the crowd, and they're wrapped around these squibs, and they're done with flash paper, binary powders in flash paper.
Right.
But the manager yelled, "Can you find any flash paper?" I said, "I can't see any." He said, "Oh, never mind, doesn't matter, I got some." I went, "Okay." He couldn't find the flash paper. He used a paper napkin.
Oh, gosh.
This is totally irresponsible. Hang on, I've got a cough here. So this thing went off. These went off in the air, and burning sparks and that fell in the audience during the show. The girl in the eye.
Oh, man, that's bad.
Her boyfriend brought her backstage and said, "My girlfriend got this thing in her eye. Fortunately, I had just some eye drops, and I gave her those, and they were happy just that somebody cared."
Right.
And now I started to reevaluate. Thought, okay, we're not doing maintenance on this stuff. He's forgotten how to mix the powders. He's just winging it now. And then the second incident, we were in Ottawa doing a university.
Right.
I was on stage. And in order to fire these things, you had to flick a switch and then turn a key. It was a double method, so you couldn't set them off by accident.
Right.
Somehow they set one of these things off right beside my foot. And a sheet of flame jumped up in the air right beside me. And it was, a huge joke. "Oh, wouldn't it have been funny if you got burned?" Like, they didn't get it. And I thought, okay,
that's not funny.
This is no fun. But it got worse.
Oh, man.
After this, I closed the point. We had a high school gig one night, and these flame projectors I alluded to were about 2.5 feet tall, quarter-inch steel cylinders. Yeah. They had a squib inside, and we put in a cup full of smokeless shotgun powder.
Okay.
And that burns really fast, would fire these flames out the front.
Right.
And he couldn't get any, so he used black powder, which is used for making bullets.
Oh, man.
And when he set them off, one of them exploded. And this is quarter-inch thick steel, like a bomb.
That's shrapnel, exactly.
Yeah, but thank God, God be eternally praised, it blew off the base instead of flying apart. It flew right up and hit the ceiling of the gymnasium. This thing weighed about 5 pounds and fell into the crowd.
Oh,
and nobody was hurt. And he's like, "Oh, isn't that hilarious?" And at that moment I said, "I'm out of here."
Yeah, because now it's getting seriously dangerous.
I went back to being a man with a briefcase.
Yeah.
And was so much happier.
I believe it. So this is a tremendous period of time. It's a very creative process. Unfortunately, it kind of ended you fortunately ended it before it ended in a bad way. Let's put it that way.
Right.
How did you feel going back to the man in the suitcase then? Because you had all these props, all these visual aids, all these sound aids to make the show really intensive, and now you're going back to just you on the stage. Did that affect your performance at all? Did you feel yourself getting better as you were liberated, or do you feel yourself being more inhibited because you have less props to hide behind? What was the experience going back to the man in the suitcase with the suitcase thing?
Absolutely liberating. Absolutely liberating.
Fantastic.
Because I could go back to my creativity and improvise. If you got an interesting subject, I could do something different. I was no longer stuck with a script.
Got it. Because this was such a technological monster, you were stuck within whatever was there. Whereas now you can go back to improvising, your natural creativity is there. And that's really part of what the skill of a stage hypnotist is about, is being able to weave the magic of the moment rather than be stuck on a script, right?
Isn't that the thing, Igor? Because I think hypnotism is the closest thing to real magic imaginable. And when you can work with a total stranger and work with that person, not with something you planned in advance. When I teach therapists, they say, work with the subject, not with the plan. Don't go with the plan. Find out what's in front of you. Be client-centered. It was the same on stage. Work with who's there.
Right. So what period are we in now? I'm guessing we're in the early 80s sometimes. Is that right?
This would be, I'm thinking it must be 1979.
Okay, so this the late 70s, and you're going back to the stage hypnosis after having had this sort of rock and roll rock star tour. You're feeling much more liberated. You get to be more creative. I'm guessing now you've become quite seasoned. I mean, you've been doing this for 5 years now, and I'm guessing you're quite seasoned as a performer at this point, which of course why you enjoy the fact that you can do ad-libs a bit more and be a bit more improvisational. What was the next phase? Because, of course, most people don't actually know you now as a stage hypnotist anymore, but rather as a great educator in hypnosis. So
yeah, not a hypnotist on stage so much. I think I probably do half a dozen a year now. That's it.
Right. And that's more for fun for yourself, just to keep your hand in the game sort of thing. Is that what it is?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, keep the hand in. Yeah, right. So it went into a different phase insofar as now it took off in a different way. I was doing more universities and colleges, but I started doing more nightclubs as well. I was opening for a lot of bands in this time too.
Okay, cool.
And a lot of Canadian rock bands that nobody would have heard of. But anyway, and that just sort of opened new doors. It got me out there in front of different audiences. And then I hated doing the bars at first. I mean, I just despised them, because at least if you're doing an evening show in a high school or a show in a university, let's say it's a high school, they're either getting out of class, so they love being there, or if it's at nighttime, they've paid to be there. Same with the university college.
Right.
Whereas in a bar, sometimes they just show up and you're dealing with the whole alcohol thing. It could be very, very stressful. It took a while to get used to doing those. So this was another level now of practice.
Right. So this actually really forced the game up a stage further, because now you've got to be much more aware of the audience, to be more selective about who comes on your stage, because you don't want someone who's blind drunk or who has an agenda other than entertainment when they come up. And you've got to be able to spot these things much more clearly, because now you're going into more of a blend between stage hypnosis and street hypnosis. Is a much more intimate venue, right?
Definitely so. Yes, that's a great way of putting it. It was like a blend of that, of the two, and I think that's when I learned to calibrate a lot better, because just by the nature of the show, I was forced to calibrate so many people at once. And what's the audience thinking? And that guy's getting up and he's walking towards the stage in the middle of my show. Is he coming up here? Like, you know what I mean? There's so many considerations at that time.
Right. And that obviously stretched your hypnosis skills even further and deepened them even further, right?
Well, yeah, I had two startling things. One was in a high school, but I'll tell you that the nightclub one, because it's the same essentially the same thing happened. But I was doing a show in a bar that no longer exists. It was in Cobourg, Ontario. It was called Chateau by the Lake. It was quite a nice place. But in the middle of this show, one of my subjects, a guy, suddenly became unresponsive, completely unresponsive.
Okay.
He did nothing. And I lifted his eyelid with my thumb, and his eyes were just rolled right into his head.
Ow.
And my initial thought was, what have I caused?
It is a concern, right? Especially in the middle of a show.
Immediately, because, I want them to have a good experience. And it's just, I still say it today, ecology first. Absolutely. My mentor, Derek Balmer, taught ecology first. Like, make that the number one thing. So I couldn't get this guy to respond. So I, on an impulse, dragged his chair over to the wall and turned him facing the wall and just left him there.
Okay.
And about 40 minutes later, he came out of it and walked off the stage looking confused. Wow. So now I know he slipped into Dave Ellman's Esdale state.
Yes.
Spontaneously. Right. And I've only had it happen twice spontaneously, but both times kind of freaked me out at first. Right,
because they are literally unresponsive and not even, you can't really get them out. Even the wake-up suggestions will fail, which means anyone hearing you trying to return them to regular consciousness and it not succeeding, they start to panic, which then starts to change the whole atmosphere of the room. It can be quite a stressful thing, even though we both know the solution is exactly what you did, which is put them in a corner somewhere, let them basically, quote unquote, sleep it off, and they will emerge naturally when the
time is right.
Right, but it's when you're running a show, or when people are asking like, what's wrong with him, and they're stressed out because they don't know what's going on. You've got to manage a lot of different dynamics, right?
Absolutely. And have you had people just drop into it by accident?
I've had a little like close demonstrations where I've seen someone in the audience sort of get that woozy look, shall we call it? And then I've invited them up because, of course, they're a gift to work with.
Absolutely.
I haven't had them actually go through the full Esdale state and me have to work like a crazy man on speed to try to figure out how to contain this without frightening everyone. So no, I haven't been that far yet, but I definitely have had audience members unconsciously volunteer, if you like.
Yeah. And the woozy look. You know, one thing I look for if I'm doing a theater and I'm above the crowd is sometimes people start to show that strawberry birthmark hypnotic rash in the hollow of their throat when I'm doing the lecture. So when I'm doing the initial lecture, if I see that and they come up and they've got Erickson's response attentiveness just staring at me, I'll just say, hypnosis can be very easy. And I'll just turn to the person and say, and sleep now. And they go right into trance and the audience goes nuts, but they don't know the person's 90% of the way there already.
Right. This kind of fool's gold. It's very impressive, but really we did none of the heavy lifting. That was basically a gift given to us. Exactly.
No, it's a gift, like you said. Remember that wonderful thing about Erickson dealing with the Esdale state when he was speaking at the psychiatric conference, and the one guy before him, the woman goes into the Esdale state, and he can't wake her up, and he's doing all the crazy things of blowing on the person's eyelids and stuff. And then Erickson comes on after the break in his wheelchair, and they're all looking to see what he does. And the old master goes up, looks at her, and whispers in her ear, and she gets up and jumps off the stage, and they go crazy. And you remember what he said to her?
I can't remember, but it was something.
He said, how embarrassed you going to feel when you wake up and find out you wet yourself in all these people here?
That's classic Erickson, right? He was not afraid of using the whole range of frame control, shall we say, right?
Yeah, frame control, anything he had to.
Absolutely.